The first time Cerelia ventured into the biodomes of the Elysium's Whisper without the weight of a formal audience was the first time in centuries she felt both amused and vaguely human. The corridors of her ship hummed with the soft thrum of quantum engines, a sound that was both comforting and vaguely musical, like the whine of a violin in zero gravity. She had chosen the domes for their soothing effect. Flora engineered to emit scents that adjusted to the emotional state of the observer. Unfortunately, one such experiment, a pollen cloud designed to inspire joy, hit her squarely in the face before she had even cleared the airlock. She sneezed with a force that sent a hovering droid spinning 3 times in the air before it landed with a disgruntled beep. "My queen," the droid intoned with a pitch so exasperated it almost sounded human. The sneeze, I believe it was spectacular. Cerelia's long ears twitched, a reflex that she had trained to remain imperceptible but now quivered with reluctant amusement. She could not remember the last time she had sneezed, nor laughed at a droid. The domes themselves were a spectacle of engineered absurdity. Floating pools of luminescent water, plants that glowed in rainbow gradients, and vines that twisted in impossible knots as if mocking gravity itself. Cerelia's boots, magnetic only to the ship's floors, clicked against the platforms, and for a moment she allowed herself to feel like a child lost in a kaleidoscopic playground. She passed a flowering bush that seemed to shimmer with anticipation, and the pollen in the air tickled the edges of her senses. She waved a hand, and a single cluster of flowers shivered, releasing more of the pollen that made the droid sneeze before her. "Seriously," the droid wheezed, "is this the welcome committee?" Cerelia's lips twitched into something close to a grin. Her solitude was interrupted by a ping from the ship's quantum sensors. A human vessel had entered their orbit. Small, unarmed, and entirely unremarkable, yet utterly provocative to her curiosity. Humans were notoriously unpredictable, and she had spent decades cataloging their behavioral patterns, all of which concluded that humans were either adorable, annoying, or catastrophic. It had never occurred to her that one might inspire her interest without needing to attack, negotiate, or insult her species in some way. Still, the notion of an unscheduled human aboard her ship made her long ears bristle in anticipation. She recalled the data file on this human, Lieutenant Aaron Thane, mid-level officer, known for both tactless honesty and an irritating grin that reportedly unnerved even seasoned commanders. "How inconvenient," she muttered to herself, though she almost smiled at the absurdity of her own words. When Aaron arrived in her chamber, he carried the exact aura of chaotic sincerity she had predicted, though even she had underestimated how awkwardly it manifested in person. His boots clattered against the polished floor and he bowed too deeply, then tripped over the edge of the command platform. "Apologies," he shouted, scrambling to catch himself, arms flailing in a gravity-neutral ballet. Cerelia regarded him, her posture regal, her long ears tilting in that subtle gesture she had learned to use when she was irritated, intrigued, or both. His cheeks were flushed, a reaction she had catalogued in humans as embarrassment, and it made her feel a strange warmth at the center of her chest, like a solar flare caught in a cup. Aaron's eyes were wide, taking in the room with a combination of awe and mild panic. "This is impressive," he said, gesturing vaguely at the walls which shimmered with hollow projections of star maps and nebulae. He leaned too far forward and knocked over a crystal orb floating in midair. It spun like a mini-planet before stabilizing again, and he whispered, "I swear I did not touch that." Cerelia arched an eyebrow and allowed herself a quiet chuckle, something she had long ago forbidden herself in formal settings. She found herself thinking that his clumsiness was endearing, which was an entirely unacceptable thought. The human attempted to adjust to the peculiarities of the ship, stepping over anti-gravity railings and trying to make polite conversation. "So, you're your ears," he said, gesturing awkwardly. "They're elegant." Cerelia froze, her mind scrambling for a diplomatic response. "They are sensitive," she replied finally, tone dry, though her ears twitched in a way that betrayed her amusement. He nodded eagerly. "Right, sensitive, very practical for, detecting danger or music?" Cerelia allowed herself a small, ironic smile. "Mostly music," she said, and immediately regretted the levity, though Aaron laughed, a genuine, unself-conscious sound that filled the room like a warm current. Their conversation was interrupted by a minor alarm, a system fluctuation in the engine's quantum matrix. Aaron jumped, more from surprise than danger, and Cerelia rolled her eyes, then extended a hand to steady him, a gesture she had performed countless times with her generals, but never with someone whose pulse she noticed. "You might want to step back," she said, voice measured yet tinged with amusement. He straightened and nodded, though he caught her hand briefly on the way back, and the touch was enough to send an unfamiliar thrill through her. She blinked, then coughed politely to hide it. The rest of the evening unfolded in a series of small calamities and minor triumphs. Aaron attempted to navigate the holographic console and accidentally triggered a 3D projection of a nebula that hovered in the room, spinning lazily. Cerelia quipped, "I hope you're not planning to reorganize the stars," and he grinned, replying, "Well, they're looking a little crowded, don't you think?" They laughed together, the sound of it startling in its novelty. For the first time in centuries, Cerelia felt a genuine connection, a human spark cutting through the solitude of her life. As the human settled into a more comfortable rhythm, moving between curiosity and awkward apologies, Cerelia realized that the most dangerous thing about this encounter was not the potential threat he posed. It was the effect he had on her. She found herself leaning toward his humor, his mistakes, and even his genuine attempts to understand the alien intricacies of her ship. The absurdity of the situation, the sneezing droid, floating holograms, and the human's constant clumsiness, allowed her to feel something she had long suppressed. The capacity for joy, for laughter, for trembling. And she trembled, though she could not yet name why, as a small star outside the viewport winked, as if sharing in the private joke of her heart. Hours passed unnoticed as they exchanged stories of improbable galactic battles, cosmic accidents, and awkward encounters with other species that seemed determined to annoy her. At one point, Aaron tripped over a gravity field generator and landed with a perfect somersault into a pile of synthetic moss, emerging looking slightly dazed but entirely amused. "Do you always entertain your guests like this?" he asked, brushing bits of green off his uniform. Cerelia allowed herself a chuckle that was all hers, a sound that had not graced her lips in centuries. "Only the interesting ones," she replied. His eyes sparkled with that irritating, human warmth, and she had to look away. By the time the artificial night cycle began, the human soldier had left, promising to return, though not before accidentally spilling a small vial of anti-gravity gel across the floor, which caused Cerelia's boots to hover briefly before she recovered. Alone again, she floated to the viewport and stared into the nebula, the stars reflecting faintly in her long ears. The ship was quiet now, but not as quiet as before. Somewhere in the laughter, the chaos, and the ridiculous mishaps, a new presence had taken root in her life, and for the first time in her long, solitary reign, Cerelia wondered if solitude was no longer her destiny. She did not yet know what it meant to tremble at another being, but she had felt it, and it was deliciously inconvenient. The hum of the Elysium's whisper was like a living thing now, almost conversational in its insistence, and Cerelia had discovered that she could hear its complaints as clearly as Aaron could hear his own heartbeat. The ship, drifting through a belt of rogue asteroids, wobbled slightly, a reminder that even empires and their vessels were subject to cosmic whimsy. Aaron had insisted on joining her for what he diplomatically called a casual systems check. Though the casualness ended the moment a floating console slid past his shoulder and narrowly missed his head. "I swear it moved on its own," he protested, scrambling to right it only to knock another display out of alignment. Cerelia's long ears twitched, a subtle signal of her amused exasperation. "It does that sometimes," she said, voice calm but with a faint undercurrent of mirth. "Mostly to remind humans that we run a precision vessel, not a circus." Aaron grinned, brushing a non-existent speck of dust from his uniform, and muttered, "Noted. I'll try to behave-ish." Their work involved more than just floating consoles and slippery floors. The asteroid belt was interfering with the ship's gravimetric stabilizers, and Cerelia, precise as always, had to correct minute deviations to prevent catastrophic resonance. Aaron's contributions were, predictably, less precise. He leaned over her control panel to press a series of buttons he had memorized from a handbook of interstellar mechanics, only to set off a holographic projection of a nebula that expanded to fill the room. "Well," he said, blinking as a swirl of stars twirled between them, "this is larger than I expected." Cerelia raised an eyebrow, her long ears flicking in subtle disbelief. Larger than you expected or than the universe allows? She asked, and despite her attempt at sarcasm, a small smile crept onto her lips. Aaron chuckled, flinching as one of the projections swirled a comet dangerously close to his forehead. Both maybe. The human soldier, clumsy though endearing, had a talent for accidentally highlighting the absurdities of the universe. As they adjusted the gravimetric stabilizers together, Aaron tripped over a floating tool and ended up tangled in a semi-transparent energy cable, dangling like some peculiar marionette. Cerelia's first instinct was to order him free immediately, but she paused long enough to suppress an outburst of laughter. "Do you need assistance or will the cable release you voluntarily?" she asked. "I'm negotiating terms," he replied, swinging gently, "but the cable is stubborn." She rolled her eyes, though the movement was softened by her amusement. Reaching out, her fingers brushed his arm as she untangled him, and she felt a thrill that startled her, an entirely inappropriate human reaction yet undeniably present. Hours of shared work became punctuated with levity and absurdity. Aaron accidentally triggered a backup oxygen filter, sending a stream of breathable mist over both of them. Cerelia raised an eyebrow, her long ears catching the gentle swirl of air. "You're turning my bridge into a spa," she remarked dryly, though the corner of her mouth twitched. "It's invigorating," Aaron said, grinning as he shook the mist from his hair. She did not answer immediately, only noted internally that she had not laughed so freely in decades. He seemed oblivious to the fact that she was cataloging each expression, each small movement, as if trying to memorize the strange ways humans made themselves tolerable. Their partnership began to evolve beyond mere necessity. While recalibrating a failing navigation array, Aaron leaned too far forward and tapped into her personal console. "Oops," he said, his grin sheepish. "I might have accidentally recalculated the trajectory of 3 minor moons." Cerelia, usually lethal in patience, suppressed a sigh. "Minor moons or major inconvenience?" she asked. His wide-eyed expression was almost comical. Both." She allowed a small laugh to escape, realizing that the absurdity of human mistakes was beginning to disarm her in ways she had never anticipated. Humor, as it turned out, was not the only weapon Aaron wielded. He had a knack for perspective, observing the universe without the tyranny of imperial expectation. When a minor turbulence in the asteroid belt sent the ship wobbling, he exclaimed, "Hey, look, we're practically dancing," and attempted a clumsy pirouette that nearly sent him into a grav field generator. Cerelia shook her head, long ears twitching, but could not suppress a giggle. For the first time, she appreciated that the universe did not always demand perfection, and that sometimes, human folly could illuminate the absurd brilliance of existence. In the quiet stretches between chaos, their conversations deepened. Aaron asked questions that were at once naive and insightful, about the reason she chose solitude, about the weight of command, about the decisions that left her unshaken on the outside yet perhaps trembling inside. Cerelia answered cautiously, revealing fragments of battles she had fought, alliances she had betrayed, and losses she had endured. Aaron listened without judgment, offering little anecdotes of human failure and resilience that made her long ears flick in amusement or surprise. He joked about falling into black holes metaphorically, about the endless bureaucracy of Earth, and even about how humans tended to trip over things that did not exist. Each laugh, each shared exclamation, chipped away at the icy veneer she had maintained for centuries. As the asteroid belt cleared, the ship returned to a smoother trajectory, yet Cerelia felt a new turbulence, a quiver in her chest that had nothing to do with navigation. When Aaron reached to steady a floating panel and their fingers brushed, the sensation was electric, startling her into a momentary pause. He looked at her, unflinching, and smiled. "I hope I'm not offending you," he said. "Not at all," she replied, though the tremor in her voice suggested otherwise. Humor had been their bridge, but now something more intimate threaded between them, subtle yet insistent. Toward the end of their shift, they found themselves in the observation lounge, watching a distant supernova paint the void with colors that no human eyes had names for. Aaron gestured dramatically, attempting to mimic the explosion with his arms, nearly knocking over a floating chair. "I call this one, Oops, I Started a Star," he said, and Cerelia allowed herself a laugh, soft and unrestrained. She realized that in his presence, mistakes became moments of connection, accidents became laughter, and the rigid protocols of her existence softened. For the first time, she could imagine a life not defined by command or fear, but by shared absurdity and a small human's irrepressible charm. When the artificial night cycle activated, signaling the end of their extended work period, Aaron reluctantly prepared to leave. "You'll, let me help again tomorrow?" he asked, voice hesitant yet hopeful. Cerelia studied him, noting the subtle human nervousness, the slight tremor in his fingers, and the warmth in his eyes. "You may be of some assistance," she replied, her voice betraying a small hint of amusement and something else she had not yet named. He grinned, a mixture of triumph and relief, and bowed slightly before departing, tripping over a grav-field line but catching himself with surprising grace. Alone, Cerelia floated toward the viewport, her long ears catching the echo of laughter that lingered in the ship's corridors. The asteroid belt was behind them, but a new orbit had begun, one around a presence that made her tremble in ways both alarming and exhilarating. Humor, accident, and curiosity had intertwined, and she realized that the most unpredictable element of the universe might not be a rogue asteroid or a supernova, but a human who made her feel absurdly alive. The hydroponic gardens of the Elysium's whisper glowed like a liquid rainbow, bioluminescent vines curling in impossible spirals, and floating pollen drifting lazily as though the universe itself had decided to pause and watch them. Cerelia moved among the plants with deliberate care, her long ears brushing softly against iridescent petals. The human, Aaron, trailed behind, eyes wide as he ducked to avoid a levitating fruit that had apparently decided to orbit his head. "You know," he said, ducking again, "I think your plants might be conspiring against me." Cerelia's lips twitched into a smile and she shook her head. "I assure you, Lieutenant, they do not possess enough malice for conspiracy. They merely enjoy chaos." He grinned, dodging another fruit, and muttered under his breath, "Noted, chaos and long ears, the signature of galactic royalty." She twitched an ear at that, and for the first time in centuries she laughed so freely that the sound echoed off the walls of the garden like a soft wind through crystal. The tranquility of the garden was interrupted by a sudden tremor through the ship. The rift ahead, the unstable spacetime anomaly they had been studying, was destabilizing, sending ripples through the hydroponic systems. Vines swayed violently and several floating planters collided with low gravity, forcing Aaron to flail comically to catch one before it hit a grav-field generator. "I did not sign up for flying fruit duty," he shouted, holding the planter as if it were a fragile star. Cerelia extended a hand to steady him and her fingers brushed his again, sending a jolt she could not ignore. "Control yourself, human, you are dangerously haphazard." Aaron smirked. "That's kind of my charm, you know." The rift's pull intensified and alarms chimed melodically throughout the ship. Cerelia and Aaron moved quickly, their previous laughter giving way to swift coordination, though still peppered with humor to cut tension. Aaron accidentally pressed the wrong sequence on a control panel, sending a holographic map of the rift spinning in midair. "I'm, kind of an artist," he said, gesturing to the swirling lights. Cerelia rolled her eyes but allowed herself the tiniest grin. "A disastrous artist," she corrected, "but at least visually entertaining." As they worked side by side, something unspoken grew between them, a silent acknowledgement that the other's presence mattered, that mistakes were forgiven and even welcomed because they came with laughter. Cerelia found herself guiding his hands when recalibrating grav-field stabilizers, and the contact sparked a strange warmth that she no longer denied. She realized with a tremor that made her ears quiver that she had begun to feel something entirely alien. Trust, affection, and the vulnerability of reliance on another being. Aaron, oblivious to the storm of emotions he was inspiring, joked as he floated upside down trying to repair a damaged conduit. "I always thought space was cold, but apparently it's just full of dramatic princesses and floating vegetables." Cerelia chuckled, a sound both amused and tender. The crisis reached its peak when a shard of unstable quantum matter threatened to breach the hull. Aaron, in an impulsive move, grabbed the containment device but slipped, sending both of them tumbling across the garden in a low-gravity somersault. They collided gently into a tangle of vines, and Cerelia found herself laughing uncontrollably, the sound unrestrained. Aaron, laughing too, blinked at her with wide eyes, clearly delighted that she could laugh at herself. "See," he said between breaths. I told you chaos could be fun. She shook her head, long ears twitching, and felt a shiver, not from danger but from the closeness, the shared human warmth, and the absurdity of surviving a near catastrophe while laughing. Together, they recalibrated the containment device, Aaron supplying ingenuity, Cerelia supplying precision. When the quantum shard was finally secured, the rift stabilized, sending a soft pulse through the ship. Both of them floated in the aftermath, exhausted but exhilarated. Cerelia's ears flicked, brushing a strand of glowing pollen from her shoulder, and she looked at Aaron, seeing him not as a guest or a subordinate, but as someone who had altered the orbit of her life. He smiled at her, grinning that unflinching human grin, and she felt the tremble again, this time acknowledging it without fear. As the hydroponic gardens settled into calm once more, they wandered together along the floating platforms, sharing stories of improbable accidents across the galaxy. Aaron recounted how he had once accidentally boarded a cargo ship full of interstellar laundry and had been chased by a flock of disgruntled spacefowl. Cerelia shared, in rare candor, tales of diplomatic meetings that had ended in interspecies embarrassment, of empires she had commanded, and the loneliness that had come with it. Humor had become their bridge, the absurdity of the universe their common language. Laughter, she realized, could be as powerful as any weapon in uniting beings across worlds. By the time they reached the observation deck, the distant stars winked at them like playful witnesses. Aaron floated near the viewport, gesturing dramatically at a swirling nebula. I call this one, oops, I started another star. Cerelia allowed herself a laugh so full it filled the quiet room. She realized that she no longer feared the tremble, the strange flutter in her chest. It was proof of life, of connection, and of growth. The isolation she had built around herself was no longer absolute. The human beside her, in all his blundering, earnest charm, had shown her that vulnerability could coexist with power, that laughter could coexist with authority, and that love, or whatever fragile human feeling it was, could exist in the cold expanse of space. Aaron turned toward her, still floating slightly off balance, and she reached out, adjusting a stray hair from his forehead. Their hands lingered together, fingers brushing, and she felt the warmth of life, not just survival, but joy, connection, and the thrill of companionship. You've changed me, she admitted softly, her long ears quivering slightly. You have, he replied, his grin genuine, and I think I've changed too. Their laughter mingled, echoing off the starlit walls, a sound as improbable and perfect as the universe itself. With the rift secured, the ship stabilized, and their bond cemented, the Elysium's whisper drifted onward. Cerelia looked out into the infinite void, realizing that solitude was no longer her defining truth. The galaxy remained vast, unpredictable, and occasionally absurd, but it was no longer a lonely place for her. She had discovered that even the most disciplined, invulnerable being could tremble, laugh, and feel warmth at the touch of another. The stars winked knowingly, the hydroponic gardens pulsed softly with light, and Cerelia, queen, warrior, and newly amused human-like